Well, you might have noticed that travel first has been in a little bit of a hiatus. Dare I say we've been battling something called COVID over the last 2 or 3 years. And what better way to relaunch it than with my old buddy, Chris Coleman, who's about to go offshore. Chris, g'day.
Not only am I going offshore, Alex, I'm going on a cruise ship. So relaunch is absolutely the right phrase to use, or the right word to use here. And not just any cruise ship. I'm going on one of the largest cruise ships in the world, Royal Caribbean's Ovation of the Seas. And we'll talk more about that soon. But it's been an interesting exercise actually getting back into the habit of overseas travel again.
Well, clearly the passport office did not want you to leave Australian shores, did they?
Well, funnily enough, they were happy for me to leave. It was my wife who had the problem. And I think it's probably just worth putting a little bit of advice, people who are thinking, yeah, now that the borders have reopened again and now that many countries are reopened again, I want to get out there, I want to travel. But you do need your passport, and a lot of people's passports have expired or got within that last 6 months. And by the way, how big a rort is that? You can't use your passport for the last 6 months of its validity period. Never understood that, but that's a conversation for another time.
I know we're making light of this, Chris, but clearly this was reasonably, well, traumatic's probably too strong a word, but concerning, shall we say.
Definitely got stressful, and I know there are a lot of people who've been having delays with getting passports renewed, not just in Australia, but in other countries as well. We discovered, and I don't know how widespread this is, but it's certainly what happened in our case, that sometimes all is not as it seems with the Australian Passport Office. When we put in our passport renewals, which was in early June, there was 16, 17 weeks until we were due to sail out. And they were saying it's going to take 8, 10, maybe 12 weeks. My passport actually came back in 5 weeks, which was some sort of a record for 2022 passport renewals. As the weeks ticked by, 6, 7, 8, we started ringing on a weekly basis just to see if there was any issue. And we're told, without exception, on every phone call, there's no problem, we're just busy, there's a backlog, there's a delay. We got to 12, 13 weeks, 14 weeks.
There are many other stories similar to yours, I've got to say. You're not the only one.
Yeah, there would be. No, and I've heard plenty of other people as well. When we got to 15 weeks, I'd been on a business trip to Sydney, so I was driving back, and I took advantage then of actually ringing on the hands-free in the car, because I figured, well, if I'm going to be on hold for ages and ages, I'm quite happy to stay on hold while I'm driving because I'm not doing anything else other than watching the very boring freeway ahead. And I was again told there is no problem. Everything is okay. It's just a delay. I said, look, we're travelling now in 2 weeks. We're going to come into the passport office on Monday and actually ask and see if they can provide us with more information, because the people on the phone can't tell you much. They can only tell you, apparently, what's happened on the last phone call, which is really setting up a system for cascading failure, because if there's a problem and
I'm somewhat confused. Don't they have the full history?
No, apparently their call centre has been outsourced. Now, I don't know outsourced to whom, whether it's to a private company or to a centralised Australian government call centre or some other agency within the Commonwealth, but they can only see in the call centre the last call. Okay. Now, when we got to the passport office, now, again, a lot of people aren't aware that there are physical passport offices. There are. If you've been waiting 4 months for your passport, look it up, find your nearest passport office and go and see them first thing tomorrow morning. Be in the queue outside the door, because there will be a queue.
I think most people really do realise. I'm based in Melbourne, and this has been on the news on a very regular basis, and people are lining up very early in the morning at the passport office, and some have had to wait for hours and hours and hours.
I was surprised. I've spoken to 3 people this week who didn't know. I'm in Canberra. I've spoken to 3 people this week who didn't know there was a physical passport office, and we're even more surprised to learn that there's one here in Canberra. We went there, and I've got to say straight up at this point, Alex, the staff at the passport office in Canberra could not have been friendlier. They could not have been more helpful, especially when, after us repeatedly questioning them, they dug deeper into it and found that, despite multiple phone calls where we had been told, no, there's no problem with your passport renewal, there was a problem. Somewhere in the process of us lodging the passport application, now we lodged it at a local post office, got the photo taken at that time, so the photo was taken, immediately attached to the application form and submitted it at that post office. Somewhere along the line, the photo got scratched. and
okay.
a scratched photo can't be used in a passport.
No,
Obviously,
understand.
nobody told us. Week after week
Wow.
after week after week, we were told repeatedly there is no problem. So the cautionary tale
let me
is, if
stop
you're
you- let
being
me stop
told
you
that,
there.
you've got to ask more questions.
Okay, let me stop you there, because you mentioned before that this was outsourced and they could only look at last phone call, not the one before, the one before that.
That is what I've been told, is that the call centre can only look at the last phone call.
So
And
would they know that the photograph was scratched?
Well, we don't know, and I'm going to do a Freedom of Information request later to see if we can find out how this all worked. So I can only give you at the moment my personal experience, or my wife's experience, which is that somewhere between week 0 and week 15, 105 days later, that the photo got scratched. And someone has made a note of it and said this can't be used, but on the outward-facing system at the call centre, no problem, no problem. Now, it may be that someone didn't see that and said no problem, and so the next time someone went in, they looked back and saw on the system, oh, no problem, and it became a self-perpetuating problem. It's what engineers call cascading failure. One thing goes wrong, another thing goes wrong, and another thing goes wrong. I don't have the full story, but all I'm saying is it is a cautionary tale. If you're waiting for your passport, if you get past 14 weeks, start asking some questions, and even go in, if there is an Australian passport office nearby, don't keep going on the phone. Go in, speak calmly and politely. I can't stress that enough, because the people at the offices are copping a lot of flack and it's not their fault. And see if they can actually find out what's wrong and why your passport's on delay. In conclusion, 90 minutes after we had entered the passport office on the Monday morning, we then had to go, by the way, to a nearby post office, get more photos taken, come back in, do a part of the form again. 90 minutes later, the passport was sorted and approved. So we're going to be able to travel. All is sorted there. The people at the Canberra Passport Office, 2 thumbs up.
Okay, so it ends very, very well. I still say that if the outsourced organisation had accessed the full history and somebody had put in their photograph scratched, they could have avoided all this unpleasantness.
Yes.
Pretty simple.
I can't argue with you about that. You're using logic, Alex. This is 2022. Logic is well and truly out the window.
Now, the other big question here is, are they making up ground? Because I've been hearing these stories for months in terms of delay upon delay upon delay. Do you have any idea or knowledge as to whether that's happening?
No idea. I have no clue at this stage. All I know is that people are still being told, apply for your passport, leave plenty of time, don't book your travel until you've got your passport in your hand. But in that case, we'd still be waiting probably. So at some stage, you've got to make the call and actually start asking questions. But yeah, I know that people are still being told it's 12 weeks, which means, well, if you're thinking of taking an overseas trip for Christmas and you need to get your passport renewed, you might want to get your skates on now.
Now, I should say at this point, bon voyage, Chris, and your wife. I hope you have a wonderful trip. We'll be hearing all about it on Travel First.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to Travel First. Available at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or your favourite podcast player. You can also stream on demand at Bytes.com. This has been another quality podcast production from Bytes.com.